Hey there, and welcome to Beer Christianity. My name is John T. Langley, and you are listening to the Halloween episode, which is just lovely because Halloween is the most wonderful time of the year. Special guest for this episode is Peter Laws, the Reverend Peter Laws, if not the very Reverend. He is a Baptist minister who used to run a podcast called The Flicks the Church Forgot, which is all about a Christian take on horror movies and basically just Christians getting together and enjoying horror movies, actually. Peter is the author of The Frighteners, a book about why we like kind of creepy, dark, ghoulish stuff. And he is also just a very nice, interesting guy. I mean, I was kind of thinking we'd have a kind of 15-minute conversation about Halloween and, horror movies and why they're kind of cool, because I freaking love horror movies myself. Definitely not torture porn, for the record, and I don't love the slasher genre, but, the supernatural stuff, I like that very much. Lots of great Christian people working in the Hollywood in horror films. The dude who directed Doctor Strange, can't remember his name. He did, I think called The Conjuring. If you've not seen The Conjuring, super Christian horror movie, as is The Exorcist, to be fair. Anyway, Peter Laws, very solid guy. Thought we'd be talking about that. And it turned out that we actually ended up talking about some very deep stuff, including, what salvation means and whether eternal conscious torment is actually a thing, and what kind of witness we are when we're taking ourselves out of our community. A lot of it went way deeper than I expected. And to my shame, I was drinking tea at the time. So I want to tell you about the beer I'm drinking right now, not because this is a beer nerd podcast, but because this is a person liking to get a little bit buzzed podcast and also loves Jesus. This is an IPA called Beardo, and I don't really know anything about it other than it's called Beardo, and it's done by Frederick Robinson in Stockport. No idea. It's got a hipster on the cover. That's basically what we're looking at, and it is... It's lovely. He has hops in his beard. I think that's important. And, it's a good beer. Anyway, the talk with Peter Laws ended up being quite long, so I don't want to distract you any further from that. It's me and Peter talking all about the kind of dark stuff he writes about. You've got serial killers in there, you've got a lock of Charles Manson's hair, and you've got a hell of a lot of Jesus. Peter, thanks so much for talking to Beer Christianity. How are you doing on this fine almost October day?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm a little bit tired because I've been speaking at this crazy conference at the weekend called Seriously Strange, which is organized by a group called ASAP, which is the Association for the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomenon. And I was a speaker there, and it was a great weekend, but it was pretty wild because we were kind of staying up till about 4:30 in the morning. So I'm catching up on sleep, but getting there.
Fantastic. What were you speaking on?
I was speaking on, my title was Go to Hell, Glimpses of the Abyss. And it was basically talking about when, back in kind of medieval times when saints had visions of hell, and then going through to, in modern times, people who have so-called negative near-death experiences where instead of going down a kind of tunnel and seeing a benign white light, they actually start seeing terrifying gelatinous monsters trying to attack them and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it was pretty interesting.
That sounds absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, it was. And I did this thing with I had a PowerPoint with just loads of really intense paintings, like Bosch and all of the sort of the classic. And and I find Hieronymus Bosch paintings are kind of the sort of the most scariest Where's Wally you can ever see, with just all these really creepy hellfire images. And but it was an interesting conference, certainly.
Also, I read somewhere, I think it was maybe it was last year, that they had found in one of the Hieronymus Bosch paintings from that famous triptych, they had found a bit of music written on something. I think it was written on something like it was written on someone's bum or something.
Oh, yeah.
had in one of the paintings, and somebody had actually found that music and kind of basically translated it into modern music, because I think that they were using weird kind of quarter tone stuff or something like that, and it does sound creepy AF actually as a thing.
Oh my word! I thought you were going to say they found like it was Crazy Frog or something, like the Birdie song, or like, you know.
To be fair, the Birdie song would actually be total and absolute hell. You are a Baptist minister, and you're also something of a horror film aficionado. The best kind of horror movies directed by or written by Christians, or some of the best movies written and directed by Christians in Hollywood generally, are horror movies, and they tend to deal with evil and the demonic and the hellish. Do you think that's a good way in for people, or for some people at least?
Well, all I can say is it was the way in for me. So, I mean, growing up as a complete non-churchgoer, and my family never would even dream of taking me to church. And so really up until my early 20s, I wasn't just kind of apathetic about Christianity. I was antagonistic towards Christianity. I really did not like the sound of faith in well, I like the sound of faith in something, like some sort of spirituality, but Christianity particularly just seemed like a kind of, it reminded me of the film The Stepford Wives, which I always loved, which was kind of, you know, like, please come to our community and we will turn you into this robot. And I just was quite off-put by that idea, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And so I rejected all of the different kind of moves and evangelical attempts from my RE teacher, and also kind of the funky Christian youth groups that would come into the church, come into the school and do RE lessons, and, you know, sit up on their desk, being all cool with their guitars and stuff and wearing trainers. Oh my goodness. And I'd be like, oh, right. I at the time, and I was being unfair to these people, of course, but at the time I just thought, wow, you guys are just, you don't care about me. You've got no interest in me because I like horror movies, and you keep saying that's bad. And instead, you just want to turn me into something that I'm not. And why would I want to follow a God who isn't interested in me? He's only interested in your version of me, and that doesn't make sense. So I rejected all of that. But throughout my teens, I was watching horror films, in which I found it was the only genre really that was taking the supernatural seriously, the only genre that was saying things that were quite subversive for my kind of anti-church mindset, which was, what happens if there's something after death after all? What happens if there's such a thing as subjective good and evil? And ironically, it was horror films that made me much more open to Christianity when I went to university and started meeting Christians as friends. That was like the first time I'd done that. And horror films had kind of scared me enough to care at that point. So yeah, there was certainly a doorway in for me, which is why I still embrace them now, because, you know, without them, I don't know where I would have been.
That's fascinating, because I think you're in a kind of you know, from what I know, I know you a little bit, and I know that you were speaking at Greenbelt recently. You're a progressive Christian. The topic of hell is not a popular one, or even evil, with the progressive church or the liberal church, or the kind of the part of the church where I find myself now is very different from my kind of, you know, fundamentalist coming to faith, which was very, you know, I mean, does it still chime with you, or has your theology kind of evolved as well?
Oh, I mean, my theology has never changed as such, because I think in a sense that horror films made me scared at the prospect of hell and evil and those sorts of things. And so I was looking potentially for some sort of good to counterbalance that. But at the same time, my outlook on life was always quite liberal and open-minded. And so I struggled with the idea of a kind of fundamentalist view of people being thrown into hell forever. But at the same time, I just wasn't sure. And so I was quite open to Christianity. But what happened with me, I suppose, on my kind of theological journey was I just assumed, once I got into Christianity and I was kind of introduced into Christianity to a more like evangelical kind of group, that in time my, you know, crazy, wacky ideas about, you know, God being fair and kind and that sort of stuff. I thought, oh, well, that's going to go. You know, in time, I'm going to understand that, yes, God is a God of justice, and he will, you know, punish a 12-year-old boy for, you know, not going to the Alpha course, and will make him burn in fire for the rest of eternity. You know, and I thought at the time my difficulty with that idea was there was something wrong with me, you know, like, okay, I will gradually, because I loved Jesus, you know, and I loved Christianity in so many other ways. So I thought, well, in time I'm gonna start getting alongside the more fundamentalist views, I suppose. And I just waited for that to happen, and it just never really happened. And what happened instead was that I just got to know the character of Jesus more and more, and started to think, you know what, maybe my rejecting of some of these fundamentalist ideas is not, it doesn't have to be me rejecting Christianity. It's just rejecting a particular flavor of Christianity. And I think that's really important, because, you know, for a little while, and I think I've met loads of people like this, and I bet you there's people listening to this now who they go through a period of struggling with certain doctrines and just figure, oh, well, if I don't tick those boxes, I'm not eligible for Christianity at all. And will kind of jump ship and feel that they're not welcome anymore. And maybe they don't get the opportunity to meet other Christians who are still Christians, but have more open-minded views on those topics. So, I would say I've always remained the same in my openness, but I've always left room for doubt. And that meant if somebody came in and said, you're going to hell, I was a bit scared of that idea.
Yeah.
And horror films stoked that fear. But I think in a positive way, because, you know, it made me pay attention.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you can't really watch The Exorcist I always found Event Horizon particularly, I mean, spoilers,
yeah.
But like Event Horizon, man, I walked out of that going like, oh my goodness, I'm glad I'm a Christian. That was my whole...
Yes.
It's just like, holy crap, that is terrifying.
Yeah, and you can like pause that film because there's so many kind of like super fast shots.
Yeah, we've done that. Hey, we've all done that. It's horrific.
Yeah.
What's the phrase?
Yeah.
Salva tutte mea ex infernis, which is the same as Hosanna, no? Kind of, sort of? I don't know, you're a minister.
Oh, man, I'm not that much of a minister.
Do you believe in hell? Do you believe it exists, or do you have enough doubt in not believing in hell to think it might?
Well, I when it comes to the topic of hell, when it comes to the topic of everything, I'm open-minded, and some people find that frustrating, and I just think that's being real and honest. And so for me, it is quite possible that there is an eternal conscious punishment for people, and that's where, who knows, maybe I'll end up because I'm too wishy-washy. So I'm open to that. But however, having said that, looking at the Bible, and particularly the character of Jesus, and also just plain logic, and that sense of conscience that I find within myself and most of the humans I meet, I'm inclined to say the kind of, firstly, the eternal conscious punishment idea, I don't personally think is real. I think that is a kind of myth that has been brought up from the church through, really has more to do with the paintings of Hieronymus Bosch and the work of like Dante and, you know, Dante's Inferno and those sorts of things. And Augustine as well, who started to elaborate and riff on these crazy ideas of fire that will burn bodies and the bodies will never end. And we've picked up on that infernalism and continued with it even to today. But if you look at the Bible itself, I'm not convinced that that's clearly what the Bible says. That there are moments where it talks about judgment and fire, but equally it talks about the fire's purpose as being a kind of refiner's fire that takes that which has got bad parts and will burn the parts off so that you can get the treasure within. It's not, you know, like if you're going to refine gold in fire, you don't chuck the gold in the fire to destroy the gold.
Yeah.
The point is to get the gold out and get rid of the crap.
Yeah.
And I think this is a consistent theme in the Bible about, you know, yes, there's some horrible stuff, and who knows, some theorists would say the hell is the hell we experience even now on earth. And you know, some of your listeners may well be in experiences where they will say, you know what, I know what hell looks like because I'm living in it. But the idea is people at the other end, there is this hope of salvation. Now, there's other people who'll go, they'll be a bit more they'll, hey, I'm being more radical, and so I reject eternal conscious punishment, and instead I accept annihilationism, where simply people kind of are chucked in the fire and they burn up and they vanish forever, which is a slightly less horrible version.
Although at an existential level, like really much more frightening.
Well, I mean, it is frightening in the sense that, you are extinguished, your existence just ends. But I suppose I'd rather that than
being tortured for the rest of eternity. Yeah, no.
Yeah,
fair.
I mean, call me old-fashioned, but I'm not really into a pitchfork to the anus. But maybe someone out there is into that, but not me.
Yeah, no judges, guys. Obviously.
Yeah. Actually, funnily enough, I used to have a Christian mate, right? And he was Christian, and he believed in eternal life, and eternal life is what frightened him. He was much more comforted by the idea when you die, you just you vanish. And he just really struggled with the concept of living forever, even if it was in a happy place. But
wow.
For me, I think I'm too self-centered to stop.
Yeah, I can't. I don't want to stop existing. I find that so
neither.
frightening.
Yeah, completely. So in the end, you're left with, either eternal conscious punishment, and lots of people just assume that's the case. I think if they looked at the Bible, they'll find it's not quite as clear as all that. A book on this topic, by the way, I'd recommend is Her Gates Will Never Be Shut by Bradley Jersak, which really goes to pains in going through all the different passages about the Bible. And what it says is, actually there are some texts that point towards a potential eternal punishment, but there's a heck of a lot more texts that suggest it's something else. And so therefore the Bible is simply not that clear. And therefore you have to start moving on to the realms of logic and compassion and your conscience, and not least the character of Jesus. And you just work out, well, look, does Jesus come across to you as the sort of imagine, I don't know, like a boyfriend who said to you, yeah, baby, I love you, I'll do it, I'll forgive you, even if you go and have affairs with 200 people, I'm going to forgive you, I love you so much. Oh, until the moment you die, which is beyond your control, and in that second, I am going to throw you into a cage, and I'm going to stab you forever. And you just think, is that how I see Jesus in the Gospels? No, it's not. And people sometimes say, oh, well, that's a kind of wishy-washy way of doing it, saying it doesn't feel right. But to me, that's a big error, to ignore what feels right in most people you'll meet. That's why so many people with the topic of hell, so many Christians don't talk about it or struggle with it, because it's embarrassing, because it's so horrendous.
Yeah.
And so don't get me wrong, by the way, I'm not saying necessarily that there is no such thing as hell whatsoever, but I think I'm more inclined to basically say, I think God is a fair God, and that everyone has an equal opportunity to respond to a kind of full revelation of who he is. And a full revelation, I'm sorry, but a full revelation is not necessarily, hey, John came to the Alpha course and he didn't really gel with it, and and so he's decided not to come to church, and so because of that, he's going to hell forever. When we have no idea what is going through John's head, there might be all sorts of reasons he can't believe or can't have faith in this stuff. And I think God is a reasonable God. In the same way as if a baby dies or a severely mentally handicapped person dies, most reasonable Christians would say God is willing to make some sort of exception. Is God not willing to take into account sometimes people's inability to accept faith in the way that maybe you and I do? Because we've been programmed in a way to be prone for it. So I think God's fair, and he's so fair that I think he probably does provide a place called hell, or a state called hell, in case anybody actually does want to reject him fully after a full revelation. But the theory is, and I meet a lot of Catholics who think this, is that if hell exists, it will therefore be very sparsely populated, if not empty. Because who would actually want that? Apart from the guy who likes the pitchfork to the anus, he'll be there.
Naturally, obviously, he'll be there. And again, no
They'll
judges, guy. No judges.
Yeah.
I am. It's weird actually because horror movies often make me believe more in the existence of hell than kind of everyday life, and I think I probably tend to be quite a kind of liberal chap.
Yeah.
And then the movies that actually make me not believe that hell exists, but make me want hell to exist in a way that is completely counter to, I think, most of my character, is when I watch thrillers in which somebody from the CIA is torturing a terror suspect, or even kind of procedural crime dramas where you have these sadistic killers who will keep people alive and like that kind of level of cruelty. It does make me, in a quite real way, go, well, there are people who have intentionally caused this kind of suffering, and I don't want them I don't want them not to suffer. And I know that's terrible because I am, I think, still in my heart an evangelical. Like, I want to believe in grace, right? I want to believe that, you know, I'm no more terrible than them. But I am no more fucking terrible than I am less terrible than them. I think. I don't know, but probably not in God's eyes. I don't know.
I totally get what you're saying, and I find that with serial killers particularly, and I was writing a book last year. A book of mine came out last year about why people are drawn to the morbid and macabre. It's called The Frighteners, and there's a chapter in that about murderabilia, where I was in York holding a lock of Charles Manson's hair in my hand, because the place I was in, you could buy it for £40 a strand, and you could have it around your neck in a vial. And this is for people who collect murderabilia, which is kind of memorabilia related to serial killers, which is obviously a whole other topic. But the book explores why that exists and why there are reasons behind it, even though it sounds shocking. But anyway, when I was researching that chapter, I found it very depressing, and also I found myself incredibly angry towards serial killers, because I love horror, but I'm kind of more of a spooky ghosts and crazy werewolves and zombies and all that sort of stuff. And when it comes to real crime, I find that utterly depressing, because that's real people and real victims.
Yeah.
And so I find myself it's very simple for me, therefore, to slip into a kind of lazy dualistic view of the world where, you know, he bad, me good.
Exactly.
And I kind of write these people off. And what happens is for example, there was a serial killer I was looking into, and I was just so appalled by this guy. I was watching a documentary, and I remember sitting in my lounge watching this documentary, and I was shouting at the screen, going, you know, "You scumbag, you filth!" And I was like, "Wow, where's this coming from?" It was about he'd mutilated and murdered some children, and I was utterly horrified by this. But then it switched to a psychiatrist giving a brain scan of this man. And it was showing how his brain was shaped in an abnormal way. And they were trying to explain that could have meant that he wasn't able to make the same sort of empathy connections as perhaps you and I could. And then it started to talk about how he was abused sexually by his mother growing up. And I'm just sitting there going, whoa, don't complicate this to this. I said, I feel much more comfortable seeing him as the monster and me as the normal human. But I just don't think life is like that. And I don't for a second want to excuse crimes like that. So I think your instinct for punishment is right. So, you know, serial killers, however, they go to prison. Absolutely. You know, that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that our eagerness to say, well, you're at such a level of evil that you are irredeemable and should be thrown into the fire forever, is natural, but it's actually it's naive, I think.
It is,
and I think unambitious when it comes to God's love.
Yeah, it's so easy to talk about grace when it doesn't matter. You know? Yeah,
exactly. If someone steals your pencil case and you're like, "Oh, go in peace, my child," but you know, where it really matters is in the people, and I do think we have to accept that we have not all been. I just read Steve Chalke's book, The Lost Message of Paul, which, you know, is another kind of excuse to crucify me, perhaps, because I liked it. But there was a bit in that where it talks about, we're not all dealt the same hand in life. Yeah. And I remember this quite vividly when I went to visit one of my friends in prison when I was in my 20s. He was in prison for drug dealing, and I wanted to take his daughter to visit. And so I went to see him, and we were in the kind of association area chatting about things, and she went to play on the little playground that they provided for the prisoners' children. And anyway, while I was talking to him, she came over and said to her dad, he says, "Oh, Dad, there's a kid on the slide, and I want to go on the slide." And now me and my nice kind of middle-class, well-behaved upbringing wanted to say, "Oh, wait your turn. It's okay. Just let him go down." But my friend, who's a great guy, by the way, he said, "Oh, you got to push him off. Well, push him down.
Wow.
And then you can go down." And I looked at him, I'm like, "What are you doing?" That's not what you say. And he was looking at me like, "No, well, that's how life works, isn't it?" And I'm thinking, oh, so if that little girl, or he has been taught that when he was young, we're not all got the same hand dealt, and we have been taught things throughout our life. And what's ironic, I think, is when it comes to the topic of hell, it's very easy to slip into a Pharisaical view and say, "Well, that person's so bad that they can't be redeemed." And sometimes people do bad things because they don't know what they're doing deep down, which is obviously what Jesus says when he's getting crucified. So,
this is it. And the crucifixion is not a gentle thing. Like, these are people who are callously and with all the oppressive power that it is easy for a lefty like me to look down on, torturing a dude, an innocent man, to death.
Well, completely. But to me, right, all of these type of arguments have pure logic to them. They make sense to me. And they make sense to most average people, I think. And they also make sense to many Christians I meet. But because they've been told that infernalism and eternal conscious punishment particularly is what the Bible teaches, they are just caught up in that, and they think that it's being dangerous or wishy-washy to question that. And I guess my point is to question it. But like I say, I've got an open mind, and it may be possible that I am absolutely wrong, and I'm on the road to hell, as Chris Rea would say.
Or worse, you're not on the road to hell, but because you're not sure. This is my fear, is becoming less convinced of the existence of hell gives you a lot less urgency. And maybe that's wrong, because,
urgency for what?
For evangelism, for witness, for caring about people coming to Christ,
Yeah, but you've given yourself away slightly when you said that, because you're saying the prime sort of task of giving Christ to people is to get them to escape hell.
Well, if hell is eternal conscious torment, then, that's my thing, because that's definitely one of the ways. It wasn't why I gave my life to Christ, but it's definitely one of the reasons why I was, when people were preaching at me, I was like, I'm listening. I hate you, but I am listening, because I definitely you have my attention. Yeah, this whole thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do. But okay then. So if eternal conscious punishment is how it is, then Christians should be way more bothered than they are. And not only way more bothered, but really, and this is actually becomes the plot of my first novel that came out, Purged, which is, in that book, there's a kind of demented Christian serial killer.
Don't give too many spoilers, man, because I want them to go and buy your books.
Oh yeah, this is all in the first chapter, and it's basically a kind of a Christian psychopath who believes he is the best evangelist in the world, because he's the one who will be willing to give up his life for the many. And how he does that is he will take his victims and baptize them and get them completely ready for heaven. And then he will murder them immediately afterwards.
Wow.
Because that is the best thing to do, surely. Because otherwise you leave that person to go ahead and backslide and lose their faith. Mm-hmm. And they will be risking the slope down to hell again. And so for him, he feels he's doing the right thing. And to me, in some sense, that is the most intellectually honest response to a truly terrifying prospect. Like, you know, if we work out when is the age of accountability, at what age do children become sinful? If it is it like Logan's Run or something, is it 12?
Yeah.
Well, let's kill them all when they're 11.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, but of course that sounds absolutely absurd. But what? So we do the nice thing and let them live till they're 15, so they get a few extra years. But then it's pitchfork time.
Yeah.
You know, there's just. I mean, I'm not trying to say I've got it all sorted out on this. And like I said, I could be wrong, but I just don't think people slow down to question the logic of this stuff, because they think to do that is to sniff the sulfur and go, oh my goodness, I'm in danger now.
You see this in kind of there's almost two. As I see it, there's almost two kind of main motivations that come from within people. There is, I think, a personality type that goes, I don't want people to get away with shit. You know?
Yeah.
Like, and you know, like, they need to get off my lawn. But like, and actually, like, there's that thing in all of us. There's a jealousy. There's a we need to not be soft. You know, there's that kind of thing. And then you've also got the kind of, I think, genuinely people who are conscientious or people of good conscience who want to say, I don't want to be responsible for not doing my bit for these people if we're wrong about this, you know?
Yeah, no, I do get that. So I do understand that, you know, if it's a question we're not 100% sure on, then to play it safe, it's worth sharing Jesus with people. But I think my point is there's a lot more to Jesus than just this kind of eternal life stuff. I mean, in some ways, and I'm not saying I don't believe Jesus was real, but because I do. But if for some reason tomorrow it was revealed that, you know, Jesus was like, you know, like an animatronic, and you know, everyone kind of somehow it gets fessed up that it's all been faked, I actually would still go, well, you know what, like, his way of approaching the world is still the best I've possibly found in my life, and so I'll continue with it. And that is about life, not just life after death. And so I find actually when you get a bit more chilled out about some of these eternal destination topics, you're able to present Jesus to people as really quite an attractive gift, rather than a kind of get out of jail free card. Because in some ways you could say, if the only reason why, this is actually another interesting idea, that some people are basically just serving God because of a fear of hell, and they're continuing being a good Christian, let's say, because of a fear of losing their salvation, and ultimately they're kind of doing servant-hearted things, and at the bottom of it there's a kind of a selfish insecurity there. Now, I'm not trying to demonize those people. I'm just saying that's not the greatest motivation to love another person because of what you can get out of it. But to simply say, you know what, I'm not fully sure what happens, but I just know I have to rely on this Jesus guy, and I'm going to trust him to be who he comes across as in the Bible, which is this uber forgiving, wonderful guy. And people often say, like, oh, well, Jesus talked more about hell than anyone else, but he does talk about places like Gehenna, which are actually like physical places outside of Jerusalem, you know, where things were kind of burned up, and there were child sacrifices and stuff, and it became a symbol of abandonment and judgment at that time. But it does not therefore follow that he has to be talking about an infernal hell like what we're talking about. And so I just think people need to kind of think through the logic of it a bit more, and to pay attention to their heart, because we're made in the image of God. And I think kindness, I find most people are pretty kind-hearted when it comes down to it. Obviously not everyone, but many are. I mean, I was interviewing a Satanist recently for something, and you know, at first you might think, oh, this guy's going to be crazy, but actually he was a very kind-hearted bloke. But he just rejected the idea of Christianity because he felt that it was, you know, stopping people in their sexuality or being themselves. But ultimately he had a very similar moral structure as I felt I have, but he'd been burned so badly by the church that said if you play Dungeons and Dragons you go into hell.
Wow.
that he was just like, how could I possibly connect with that? And that's the same feeling I had. When someone says, stop watching Friday the 13th, come and watch some Christian thing instead. And I'd be like, slow down. I think God loves me. I think he loves me who I am. And I don't think that means I don't have to change my ways. I don't think punishment is not on the cards, in the sense that, sometimes God does discipline us, I suppose, in the same way as a father will discipline a child. But when I discipline my kid, discipline's a bad word. It sounds like I'm assume the position, boy. Whack, whack. That's not what I mean. But I will tell off my child, or say that's wrong, or in a firm way, or you can't go to your room occasionally. But the ultimate aim of that is for their kind of rehabilitation, or for their good. If it was a punitive, I am doing this to punish you for what you just did is so bad, I'm going to punish you for this, and there's no reprieve, I think most people would say that parent needs to see a social services officer.
Any parenting technique that is total and absolute and eternal is probably you need to hone that down.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, the most helpful thing that the church could say to kids about is not, because you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you're going to hell. It's because you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you're not going to prom. I think that's that's speaking truth to that.
Yeah. I can't argue with that. That's quite.
Listen,
that's a great one.
I want to talk about, because we're going to put this thing out around Halloween. I want to talk about. The church's attitude to these spooky things. And you wrote the book, The Frighteners. You literally wrote the book on this, about why we're attracted to the macabre and the spooky and the creepy and all that kind of stuff, the dark. Why are we, and why is it okay?
Well, the first thing to say is some people tend to think it's weird to like this stuff, and that it's kind of almost like anomalous. Like, why would a human being be interested in that? But actually, if you look across the scope of history, you will see that we have been consistently interested in morbid things. And so, like, when I interviewed a local head teacher of a primary school, and I talked to her about children, for example, being interested in the morbid, she was saying, without a doubt, there is occasionally one or two kids who freak out if we start talking about the plague or the Great Fire of London, or if we bring in an animal skull to teach about carnivores. But she says, on the whole, like 95% of all children in my entire career get excited by that. And if there's a dead bird on the school lawn, they'll gather around that and go, come on, everyone, look at this dead bird. So this is consistent in all cultures and in throughout history. So the first thing to say is it's not weird to be attracted to this. It's actually statistically fairly normal. But then you've got to ask, well, so why are human beings interested in these things? Oh, by the way, of course, some of your listeners will be sitting there going, well, I don't like this sort of stuff. But, just look at the culture we have. Like, how many people watch, cozy crime dramas on a Sunday, Murder, She Wrote, or Columbo, which ultimately all revolve around a corpse. And even like soap operas, like Hollyoaks at the moment's got serial killers in it. So I don't just mean like zombie movies. I mean, there's a morbid thread. There's a kind of threat of death and suffering in a lot of the culture and the art that we consume. So yeah, so we are into it. But the reasons why we're into it, I think, are kind of many and varied. But here's a few kind of brushstrokes, I suppose. The first thing to say is that the human brain is hungry for information, particularly information for survival. Now, I suppose this is where I come from, an evolutionary perspective. I don't know how, what your clientele are like who listen to this, but I'm not sure exactly how God created the world, but I'm open to the idea of evolution with some sort of organizing principle behind it, i.e. God. And so I think the brain wants to survive and wants our ancestors to survive. And so any information that will help us avoid death makes sense to pay attention to. And that's why when a car is driving on the motorway and they look over and they see a car crash, sometimes you will want to look at that and you will want to gaze at that. And some people will find that really scary and think, crikey, what's wrong with me? Am I getting off on death? And it's like, no, you're not. You want to avoid the same fate. And your brain wants to know, how fast were they driving? Where were they? You know, what was the conditions on the road? And then suddenly this horror shocks you into wisdom because you start driving more safely and you stop texting at the wheel. So there's a kind of survival aspect to understanding what to avoid. It's why Stephen King, the author, collected a scrapbook about the serial killer Charlie Starkweather. And he was asked, why on earth would you do that? Are you glorifying the crimes? And he says, no, I'm trying to recognize a freak like that if I ever meet him so I can run away. So there is a kind of an interest, but there's also, as well as that, there's simple curiosity. To think that we would not be interested in this subject at all, to me, seems absurd, because death is 100% relevant to every single one of us. And there may be people out there who would quite happily skip along the meadow and say, I will never think about that topic. But for most of us, it's a topic we know exists, but it's so hardcore. It's not an easy way. It's not an easy thing to address full on. So in the book, for example, I interview a historian who was given a diagnosis from the doctor where he possibly could die. And the way he dealt with that was he organized to sleep over in the local disused morgue on a mortuary slab.
Whoa.
I know. And for most of us, we would not do that. But the principle's the same in that he was going, oh, crap, I'm terrified by this. I want to address this. And he did it that way. But most of us aren't as full on by that. So what we do instead is we have generated a culture in which there are simulations of death. There is like the ascent of death's image in our culture. I mean, seen like particularly in the zombie genre where, you know, like maybe in the Victorian times, like corpses would be quite a normal part of the furniture almost. You know? Like people taking a picture of Granny after she died and sticking it on the mantelpiece, that would be normal. You know, people wouldn't dream of doing that these days. I talk about in the book, there's a company called Anne Vinely who will take your ashes and will press them into a vinyl record. And so I know, so you can like pick your favorite songs, or they'll come and record you with a message to your family or whatever.
Oh, and that is trippy. Wow.
Yeah, and then they can listen to it back, and every time you hear a pop and a crackle, that's Granddad. You know, that's Granddad messing up the quality of your album. But anyway, so it means that we live in a world where death is actually hidden from most of us, real death, but the curiosity still remains, and so we come up with ways of addressing it in ways we can handle, and that's actually what I do. The reason I like horror and I write stories and novels about scary things and particularly violent things in the novels is because I'm actually very disturbed by death, and I, like, maybe more than some of my Christian friends, I just find it so offensive and horrible, and suffering and violence. I just hate that stuff in real life. And I find myself so scared by it that all my life I've tried to build courage. And the way I build courage is to expose myself to simulations. And I'm not necessarily saying it works, because I'm still scared of real death. But that's the reason. It wasn't because, you know, like, this is the thing, and this is the misunderstanding. People think horror fans, you know, are like, they'll go and watch a horror film, and then they'll go home and they'll find out about some guy's been stabbed in a nightclub, and they're sitting rubbing their knees going, oh, God, this is what I'm into. And it's like, actually, almost every horror fan I know would be horrified by that.
Yeah.
And they're trying to kind of deal with fear. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's also the true crime interest.
Yeah.
But even the true crime interest, people seem to be interested in things that have a bit of distance.
Yeah.
To them.
Well, I find I was, as a kid, I discovered Dracula and it changed my life. And I was like, I begged my parents to buy me a coffin to sleep in. And I got to say, there's an element to that. And like, you're into all that kind of stuff. You get your first cancer diagnosis and that stuff seems way less cool there.
Yeah. However, I mean, I did interview a lady who she keeps her coffin in her lounge. Her boyfriend built it for her, and she's got it in her lounge with a mannequin in it, with a raven on top, and she's just going to sort of switch it out when it's her time. I did a funeral just a few days ago, and I needed a lift to the reception, and the people in the hearse said, "Oh, well, do you want to lift with us?" And I've never ridden in a hearse before, and so they gave me a lift there. It's very echoey inside, and I remember I just sent an email to the funeral directors, with the bill and all the sort of things for expenses and that, and I said, "Oh, thanks for that's my first time in a hearse," and then I suddenly thought, "But it's not going to be my last." It's like, oh, how weird.
That's so yeah,
death's intense, and to think that we are all just gonna, grab our mandolins and start playing happy jolly music throughout the threat of that. I just think that's weird.
Yeah,
we are and some of us are traumatized. We have traumatic experiences, and we're looking for ways of putting them into kind of more order. Some people, don't get me wrong. I mean, I talked to a soldier, and she said she used to love horror films, and then she went out and saw real life horror, and it put her off, and she didn't want to connect with it anymore. And I've met people who've gone the opposite way.
Yeah,
they've seen real life horror and they come back and they expose themselves to it again. But I don't think it makes them freaks. I mean, they sound like freaks to other people, but I don't think we can dismiss them as easy as that. I see them as human beings.
Where does the Halloween thing come in? Because this is where I think for most kind of nice middle-class Christians, they're like, listen, I don't want, little Tarquin to be dressing as a vampire. And I've never really understood this logic because then we'd be glorifying evil. And I always just want to kind of, sidle over to them and whisper and go, it's not real.
Exactly.
I don't know if you know this, but they don't exist. I mean, like the Christian kind of fear of Halloween as glorifying evil, particularly when it's in those sorts of things. You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the fear that some Christians express about Halloween, to me, in their worldview, the devil is magnified way beyond his power. And it kind of makes me a bit sad when I hear about Christians saying, oh my goodness, like Sainsbury's have the Halloween aisle, and I kept my head down as I walked through the valley of the shadow of death on the way to the ready meal section. There's something a bit sad about that to me because we have a God who is greater than death and who has taken the sting away from death, and I think this is what Halloween does very well. It takes a natural point of the year when summer has ended and the trees are starting to die, and it's a natural part of the year to reflect upon on the cycle of life and death, and that's why we started celebrating it in the first place, and Samhain and all this sort of history of that. It's normal to do that, but what does Halloween do? Halloween turns it into a party, into a place where people have a giggle, and what better image of Paul's words about death, where is thy sting, than a kid dressed as a skeleton with a mask on, laughing like crazy into its face, like laughing death in the face because he's got a flippin' skull mask on. To me, it's this kind of amazing image of humanity and life within the furniture of death. So I think Christians are missing a trick with Halloween, and also ought to be very aware of how the opposite view comes across. So instead, let's say Christians say, "Oh well, no, let's reject Halloween because it's dangerous." And by the way, often some of the threats they say about Halloween are based on urban myths. you know, the pagans on Halloween's, they put razor blades into popcorn, or it's the day when the local covens come down and put audio cassette tape around the churches, and they've got curses on there to, you know, pray prayers against Christian marriage because they worship the devil, and all this just stuff that is not real, and is not reflected in Wicca or all those sorts of things. So a lot of it's based on propaganda. And what happens is you get a church that says we refuse to celebrate Halloween, and they're not noticing that Halloween is swiftly becoming the most community-based celebration in the whole calendar. Christmas is a very insular, individualistic holiday. Ironically, yes, we give presents, but ultimately it's about me and my family. You know, people would not go out and hang out with other families necessarily, or neighbors or whatever on Christmas Day, because it's about what's close to you. Whereas Halloween, by contrast, is this kind of it's developing into this amazing community event. I've just moved into a new house and a new estate, and already the families are organizing, hey, let's get together, let's have a party, let's do this. And to think that I would come into that as the Christian and the voice of light and say, well, actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to a lights party in my church, which is out of the way of all this. And also, when they have the Halloween party at church, I'm going to send Tarquin dressed as Moses. Do you know what I mean? And Tarquin gets his head kicked in by a bunch of zombies because he's like getting bullied. Because like, what the hell are you dressed as Moses for? And at the end of it, you know, the weekend's over, and we're going, oh well, everyone in the community thinks we're weird, and Tarquin's got a bloody nose, but we'll go, but at least we stopped the pagans from killing us. And you're like, hang on. So I think we just have to have a bit of a rethink about it. Now, don't get me wrong, and I think some people would be maybe accuse me of being naive, and I don't want to suggest that there's no kind of weirdos out there, and you know, some people do crazy things on Halloween and commit crimes, but they do that all the year round. On the whole, you know, the local families in your community just want to have a laugh and experience a bit of controlled fear. To me, that's quite natural, and to think that we opt out of that as Christians in a very judgmental way and a dismissive way based on urban myths, I think is counterproductive.
Peter, thank you so very much for all of your thoughts. Where can people get hold of The Frighteners and also your other books?
Yeah, well, they're available in all good bookshops now, and probably even a few bad ones too. But yeah, you can get them in bookshops, online. They're available. The Frighteners, Why We Love Monsters, Ghosts, Death and Gore is out in hardback, ebook, paperback now, and it's I don't know if are people listening all around the world, I guess. So there's an American edition, there's a Taiwanese edition coming out this year. So yeah, it's kind of available in most places. And then my novel series, which is based on a character called Matt Hunter, who's an anti-Christian, or sorry, not anti-Christian, an ex-Christian turned atheist who becomes a professor, an academic professor who helps the police solve religiously motivated crimes. And the first book, like I said, is on the trail of this baptizing murderer. The first book's called Purged, and that's out in shops or online. And you can follow me on Twitter at Rev Peter Laws, YouTube, Peter Laws, Facebook, all the normal places.
Do you still do the horror movies and the podcasts and stuff? I remember I got to know you through the Flicks the Church Forgot and stuff. You still doing that or something similar?
Not as much. I hopped over to YouTube because I found that was a kind of better in terms of people finding you or stumbling across you because they've got a good search engine. But that actually takes a bit more effort to make YouTube videos, and since the writing's taken off, which is wonderful, it's just a little bit more busy. And so, I don't actually do as many of those as I ought to. So I'd like to get back to that. But I still do it. And I write a monthly horror movie column in a print magazine called The 14 Times, which is in all shops.
Peter, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Jonty, thank you. It's good to talk about this stuff.
We really should have been drinking, but I don't know, man. It's still quite early after work for me, and it just wasn't that bad a day.
I've got one.
Oh, nice, excellent. I drank tea, much to my shame. What were you drinking?
I was drinking Golden Crown Golden Ale. That's what I'm on.
Golden Crown Golden Ale.
Yeah,
okay.
I just found it in the fridge, so I just pulled it out. It's I don't know who makes it. Oh, Harper's Brewing Company.
Very
It has
nice.
extraordinary character, apparently.
Excellent, as do you. Well, I'm going to go and open myself one now, and thank you so much for your time.
No, bless you. Bye-bye.
I mean, isn't that lovely? Isn't he lovely? Peter Laws, he does, well, he, like he said, he has that YouTube channel, but you should check out his book, The Frighteners. It's really very excellent. I've never read any of his novels, but I imagine they're excellent, and they sound, they sound very cool, actually. So check him out at the addresses that he said. And thank you very much for listening to Beer Christianity. This has been our special Halloween episode. I hope you enjoy your Halloween. I hope that, if people come around to your door, they get a vibe of not preachiness, but actually of somebody who's kind of enjoying getting into the spirit of things. To be fair, you don't have to be a conservative. You don't have to be a pious individual to have that attitude. You could be a leftist. You could be a progressive kid who is the one who is always taking a pee on the parade of others having a good time. So that's not who we want to be. It's not the kind of thing that I think delights people and makes them think, hell yeah, I want to be a Christian. And I sure AF have been the kind of person who, and am regularly the kind of person who tends to pee on other people's parades. So, you make one Halloween resolution this Halloween. It could be, hey, I'm going to take the opportunity to not take the opportunity to piss on someone's parade. So when they say, hey, do you want to go to Starbucks? You don't have to say sure if they pay some tax. You could just go, okay, man, if you like, I'm probably not going to get anything, but let's go there. Or if they show up at your house and say trick or treat, you don't have to hand them a tract and say tract or treat, mother flippers. You could actually just go with the flow and let people have some joy. Just a thought. Thanks for listening to Beer Christianity. My name's John T. We've got some other cool stuff coming up. I also want to say, please subscribe. That's apparently the thing. That's how we measure these here podcasts' success. But hey, man, it's not about measuring success. It's just about letting it happen. But it's also very much about measuring its success. So if you wanted to subscribe and just download more, if this is the first one you've listened to, that's very cool. You can find out more at beerchristianity.libsyn.com. Now, I want to make clear, Libsyn is not a conservative evangelical judgment on, Peter's ideas or my ideas or anything like that. It's in fact spelled LIBSYN, standing for Liberated Syndication. At some point I'll get my own URL, but until then, beerchristianity.libsyn.com. That's where you want to be going to download previous episodes or future episodes, and also to subscribe. And if you want to email us, it's beerchristianity@yahoo.co.uk. I say us, it's me, I'm going to be reading it. But suggest some people who can talk to, or if you think you would be great to be on the show and have something to offer, then that'd be really rad as well. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.